Realism is, one thing realism has going for it is really easy. It's simple. If I say realism, you say power. If I say liberalism, there's a number of things we could say. Institutions, you could say progress, you could say technology. So we'll just say liberalism is all about institutions, cooperation, building technology, and progress. It's all those sorts of things. They're all interrelated. Any one of them alone is enough, but because we don't have that much insight into liberalism right now, we're just going to say these things. So if we're looking for why the Cold War ended, when and how it did, we would look at these things right here. What do these things tell us about that? And really the liberals point to two big factors. The first factor they point to is what we call the information revolution. If there's one thing that's key, it's this idea of this cooperation building technology. Technology improved in such a way that cooperation was easier and easier. It becomes progress, that as we sort of move forward in time, we create this technology that allows us to cooperate better. And that's what happened here, is technology just changed in such a way that it was easier for the Soviets and the Americans to essentially find ways of cooperating and avoiding, and this is a key thing, it would be so costly not to cooperate because of nuclear war and the end of all humanity that the US and the Soviet Union found ways to cooperate better. All right, and the information revolution is a big part of this. Economies grow from information technology. That is sort of a true thing today. Again, we go back to the Middle Ages. Your economy kind of grows because of better agricultural methods. That's not true now. That's not going to get your economy going. And it's not even going to be manufacturing that's going to get your economy going, despite what you hear about things like NAFTA and all that kind of stuff. Those are, job creators and all that, but that doesn't grow your economy. The way economies grow today, that's where the money is, if you want real growth, is going to be the information technology and all the stuff that goes with that. It's being experts in information, not experts in manufacturing. All right, great. So information technology is where economies grow. Now, Gorbachev sees this and he says, look, the Soviet Union, we could become a manufacturing powerhouse, but that's not going to help us economically. We won't be able to keep up with the United States and Western Europe if we're building things and they're doing the information technology stuff. So we have to get into the information technology game if we're going to be a global power. Great. Sounds like a strong plan. So what does the Soviet Union have to do this, to achieve this to change their economy in such a way that they can actually grow and keep up in the modern age? They have to join the new corporate world. Information is not something you can sort of silo off and here's information's true for this half of the world, information's true for, it has to be sort of connected. So you have to join that new corporate world. You have to join the global, for lack of a better term, capitalist world. But you're a communist power. So how are you going to do that? You're going to have to tweak things a little bit in order to get in on the action. You have to change a little bit. That's what the Soviet Union has to do. A lot of Gorbachev's reforms, you saw in the book, Perestroika, Glasnost, a lot of that was about trying to, without being not communist anymore, to help the Soviet Union to adapt its economy so it can play nice and trade with others. So you have to get the West to lower their restrictions. Like right now, the West, in the Cold War, the West is saying, you can't do business with the Soviet Union or anybody in the communist world. It's out. Complete shut off. We'll trade with Western Europe. You can't trade with Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. Fine. The only way the Soviet Union can grow is if they get in on that trade, which means they have to get the West to lower those restrictions, which means they have to play nice, which means they have to demonstrate that the Soviet Union can play by the rules, which again means even though they're a communist country, I'm using air quotes here, they're a communist country, they're going to have to show that they can play a little capitalist. China had to do the same thing. China is a communist country that if it's going to be part of the global trade, which means importantly Western Europe and the United States, Japan, it's going to have to change some of its economic rules, which is a little problematic. And then the other thing is, you can't sort of be pointing missiles at each other and expecting trade to go very well. And so there's got to be a lowering of the defense, lowering of the threat stance. In other words, Gorbachev is essentially saying, we can play ball, let's not fight, let's kind of chill out a little bit. And that helps sort of drive that. And again, this is all driven by the fact that if you're going to improve your economy, it's got to be this, and that's that liberal version. The second idea that comes out of this is, factor 2, is the détente of the 1970s. So again, remember détente. Détente is the U.S. and the Soviet Union say, look, we're not friends, but we don't have to be actively trying to attack each other either. And so we can sort of, we can coexist, but, that's the détente of the 1970s. And what do you get out of this? And what the liberals going to say is, remember, part of this is it's over time you learn to cooperate more and more and more. So these two great powers essentially learned how to cooperate and trust in the 1970s, which made it easier to cooperate and trust in the 1980s. So in 1972, these treaties, where they practiced, again, from the way the liberal would say this, these two countries practiced cooperation. Were they very good at it? They weren't very good at it. But because they practiced, they were a little bit better at it in the 80s and a little bit better at it in the 90s, and that sort of leads to the whole sort of collapse. So some important treaties back in 1972 were the SALT treaties, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, where they limited strategic arms, set the ceiling on the number of nuclear missiles in the world. The ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, nobody gets nuclear defense systems. Now, of course, Reagan comes along and says, well, forget that treaty. That kind of made things a little more complicated. But that's the ABM treaty. Realists are saying, what would realists say about these things? They'd say, who cares? And in fact, they'd point out, they'd say, look, they signed this treaty, and then in the 1980s, they did Strategic Defense Initiative, so treaties don't matter. The liberal would say, yeah, okay, it was kind of a jerk move to sign a treaty and then turn around the next day and do something different, but it was still good practice. It was still at least some practice. It just wasn't, the execution wasn't very good, but you still got to take some swings if you're going to get a hit. I don't know why a baseball analogy worked itself into there. 1975 Helsinki Accords are another piece of evidence that the liberals point to, which say it wasn't great cooperation, but it was still practice that would lead them to this later on. In 1975, after the Helsinki Accords, Eastern and Western NGOs meet and form contacts. And especially the ones that meet are going to be the ones that aren't political at all. It's going to be like mathematicians from the East and mathematicians from the West get together and have a math conference together. Great. This is actually, it feels like math, that's a very non-political thing. That's super. Physicians, just like biologists would get together. I mean, it'd be more of a scientific thing, but then that would grow to other things. And what that would mean is, again, no big deal. They're just practicing this. But what would also happen is when these Eastern mathematicians and Western mathematicians would meet at a conference, they would talk. And they would talk not just about math, but they'd talk about other things as well. And Western ideas start to come into the Soviet Union from outside. And they had this new opening. And one of the things that's going to happen is, from 1975 till 1985, these ideas are going to filter their way into Soviet society a lot more. It doesn't feel like it's going to be a big deal, but it is. It sort of creates this new group of people called the New Thinkers. Had a big effect on Soviet, quote-unquote, New Thinkers. And one of those New Thinkers is a guy named Gorbachev, who in 1985 becomes the head. And from that, he puts those new ideas into practice. We don't have to be so afraid of those Western ideas, and that led to the things we saw with Factor 1. So the liberal gives Gorbachev, but really not just Gorbachev, but progress itself, the changing sort of world, and practicing cooperation. That's what gets sort of the heavy lifting for the explanations of what the end of the Cold War is. All right, watch one more video here. The celebration. It all wins. In the end, it's all good, and then we'll come back and